Hi there, grade eights, and welcome to another wonderful Monday morning. A fantastic day for socials. I'm so sorry that I can't be here with you today for class, but even though class is going to be a little bit different, we do have some great stuff that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be continuing our discussion about the Aztec people. Up until now, we've been learning a little bit about their society and their culture. We've been learning about the land that they lived in, what some of the important things were in their culture, important people, how their society was run. Today, we're going to continue that discussion, and we're going to start by talking about education within the Aztec Empire. Now, did you know that Aztec children, they were actually educated at home until they started school? Now, school for them was a little bit different than what it is for us today in our society. From best guesses or best estimates, the school range for Aztec children began anywhere from the ages 10 to 15. Can you imagine not going to school until you were 15 years old? I mean, some of the ways that that could impact your life are quite great, you know? Think about that. What are some ways that that might actually affect your life? You didn't have to set foot into a school until you were 15 years old. Some of the codices that we have found actually tell us that all the different classes in Aztec society pampered their children right up until the age of 3 years old. But after that, they were expected to be hardworking and obedient. And if they weren't, they were harshly punished. Now, the aim of this discipline was not to hurt them or to be mean or anything like that, but the point of the discipline was to turn them into citizens with a stone heart and a stone face. Think about that for a moment. What do you think that means? Okay? How does it fit in with our own ideas of citizenship? Education was valued by the Aztecs. All schooling was free, and every single child went to school. Now, there were actually two types of schools. There was the Kalmekak for the nobles, and the Telpoklali for commoners. The Kalmek was located in neighborhoods where the nobles lived. It was often attached to some type of temple. And the students would study codices, they would learn about their society. Religious training was also a really important part of their education. Now, the Aztecs based all of their higher education on the ability to read and write, using a system of pictures, what we call glyphs, instead of letters. Now, only nobles were the ones that learned how to read and write. The commoners received all of their instruction by the spoken word instead of reading it. And so this is actually something that helped to enforce the Aztec social order. So the nobles had different skills than the lower class. Now, our counting system is based on the number 10. And interestingly enough, this is because before the invention of writing, people would use their fingers to count. And so we have 10 fingers. Now, the Aztecs, they used their fingers and their toes to count. So their system was based on the number 20 instead of the number 10. The fact is that this number was so useful to the Aztecs that it actually took on a very sacred meaning for them. If you recall back in previous chapters, the Aztec calendar saw that every month had 20 days. Okay, so you can see that number 20 was very important to them. Now, at school, all of the boys trained as warriors in order to defend the Aztec state. And once a young boy knew how to fight, he would serve as a soldier's servant, and he would follow the army to learn how warriors conducted themselves in battle. Now, at the age of 15, boys became warriors themselves, and they actually took an active role in battle. Can you imagine that? 15-year-olds in battle. Pretty young. The eagle and the jaguar were the most prestigious military orders. Commoners, they had different schools, which we talked about earlier. And since commoners didn't learn to read and to write, all of their instructions were spoken. So students needed to learn their lessons through memorizing. So they would be told something and they'd have to memorize it. Teachers would give them oral lessons in history and religion, as well as citizenship duties. Now, since music was really important in their religion, they actually learned how to play flutes and drums and dance the sacred dancers as well. Boys spent a lot of their time at school doing things like hard physical labor, so digging ditches, carrying firewood. Boys and girls also received some practical types of instructions from their parents at home that helped them to prepare for family trade. In a lot of the other cultures at that time, Aztec women had very little political power. The emperor and every member of his council were men. Unlike many other societies, though, the Aztecs thought that it was important for girls to get a good education. Every single girl, regardless of her social rank, attended school. And at the age of 16, most Aztec girls ended up getting married and they moved in with their husbands. Then they, in turn, educated their own children until they were old enough to attend school. Now, even though women couldn't hold public office, that didn't mean that the Aztec society undervalued them. In a lot of cases, women went with the army as doctors and healers because they had the most knowledge about medicinal herbs. Some girls actually chose to be priestesses. People would consult them to choose, the lucky day to set out on a journey or a lucky day to get married. A lot of the older women, too, would act as matchmakers. They would bring young people together for marriage. And they also served as the midwives of the society. You ever heard the phrase peace, order, and good government? These are the principles that the Canadian Confederation was founded on in 1867. Now, compare this motto to those of France: liberté, égalité, fraternité, or liberty, equality, and brotherhood. Or in the United States, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What do you think some of the different worldviews are that are suggested by these national models? If you could choose any three items from any of them to make into a motto that would best represent your own worldview, which three do you think you would choose? Aztec society was focused on producing citizens who would contribute to the community. So, lessons in good citizenship were a part of Aztec children's education. The definition of an ideal citizen varies greatly between different cultures and different communities, but the Aztecs had a very clear idea of what ideal meant to them. So some of the virtues of the ideal Aztec citizen would be courage. Aztecs were expected to show courage and deal with hardships without complaining, because it's what made the army strong. Self-sacrifice. The group was considered more important than the individual. So every Aztec had to be willing to sacrifice possessions, comfort, even life itself for the good of the society. Modesty. No one, not even the greatest warrior, was able to boast about personal achievements or do anything else to stand out from the crowd. Clean living. People had to keep themselves healthy and avoid overindulging in food and drink. The Aztecs actually harshly punished what they considered evil behavior. And finally, obedience. Everyone had to obey their superiors without question, because this helped preserve the social order. The Aztec people had their rights protected by a system of written laws. The legal system was a very powerful tool for maintaining order in their society. It served to remind people of their responsibilities as citizens to be honest and obedient. Every citizen, even nobles, had to obey the laws. Now, since nobles were expected to set a good example for everyone else, the law often judged them more harshly than the commoners. Just like in courts today, the Aztec judges would base their decisions on evidence that was presented to them. And once the judges had reached their decisions, they would hand down their sentence. So for things like would be considered lesser crimes, the guilty person was fined or sentenced to slavery. The Aztecs didn't have prisons, so punishment for serious crimes, including theft, often ended up being death. The Aztecs realized that slaves performed much of the necessary work. So, for this reason, they also had laws that protected a slave's rights. If a noble beat a slave so severely that the slave died, the noble could actually be executed because of that. If slaves sold in the marketplace could escape and run to the emperor's palace, which ended up being a distance of about 1.5 kilometers, they would immediately win their freedom. Now, there are two things to remember about the way the Aztecs looked at slavery. First, they didn't think it was shameful to be a slave. It was more a matter of luck, or bad luck in this case. And second, they didn't consider it a permanent condition. Slaves could keep their property, including their own slaves, until they paid their debts and took their place in society again. So children that were born to slaves were actually free.